Welcome back to another episode of The Founder, a show that features entrepreneurs and their early stories of ingenuity, struggle, and perseverance to get their companies off the ground. We do our best to capture the uncensored, uncovered look behind the curtain into what founders really face when getting started. I'm your host, Kallaway. My guest today has always been a self-proclaimed science geek. During his sophomore year at Miami University, he took a backpacking trip to the Swiss Alps. After triumphantly making it to the top of the tallest mountain, he was disappointed to realize he looked like the Michelin Man, wearing layers upon layers of puffy goose-down coats to keep him warm. He didn't get it. With all this incredible innovation happening in other industries, why was outerwear the same old, same old? When he got back to school, he learned about aerogel, the best insulation in the universe. It's the thing that NASA puts in space shuttles to keep the astronauts toasty in space. He thought immediately that this stuff needed to be in every jacket in the world. After some experimentation and trial and error to get the aerogel into a form that worked for apparel, Lukla was born. Today, Lukla goes by a new name, Oros. At Oros, this founder and his team make next-generation consumer apparel. Their tagline, "Find Your Beyond," couldn't be more true, as their clothes are designed to withstand the coldest elements. You can literally wear a t-shirt and their jacket at the top of a mountain and stay completely warm. Today, they sell jackets, mid-layers, and pants, as well as a few accessories for both men and women, but it's easy to see where they could go from here. As a special offer just for our listeners, this founder and his team are offering 15% off all their products through the end of August. Use code FOUNDER at checkout to take advantage. This was an inspiring interview that opened my mind up to what's possible in the apparel space. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Without further ado, the co-founder of Oros, Michael Markesbery. Let's get it. Michael, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So before we dive into the growth story and the idea for Oros, I like to start off with just an anchor point. Can you give us an anchor point of where the business is today, kind of what your mission, vision are, and the products you sell today?
Yeah, Oros is a technology company that makes consumer apparel. We took the same tech that NASA used to insulate space shuttles and put it into apparel so you can wear really thin gear and stay incredibly warm.
How pervasive are you guys in the market today? How would you characterize it, either revenue or growth stage? How big is the company today?
Yeah, we're definitely a startup and still a small company at that. Historically, we've doubled revenue every year, and our goal is to continue doing that in the future. So we're definitely still small, but growing pretty quickly.
Cool. So let's kind of rewind the clock a bit. I'd love for you to take us through just your kind of life and background leading up, college-ish time or a little before, what you were interested in, and then all the way up to starting Oros.
Yeah, of course. So, you and I went to the same school. We both went to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And my sophomore year, I went backpacking across Europe. And I ended up climbing the tallest mountain in the Northeast Swiss Alps. And it was an incredible experience, except I looked like the Michelin Man. It didn't make sense to me, there's been all this innovation in the world in the last 100 years. We created Wi-Fi. We landed a man on the moon. Like we've done all these things, but like we were still doing the same thing with outerwear, where we were just taking animal byproducts like goose down and shoving it into a jacket and hoping for the best. And that didn't make sense to me. I was a science geek, and I looked at the world in terms of like innovation and all these cool things, but we still relied on all this bulk and layers to stay warm. And so I figured there had to be a way to cut all that bulk, cut all the layers, and still stay warm. And so I came back to the US, and at that time I was pre-med, studying to go to med school. And when you're studying to go to med school, you join a research lab. And so that's what I did on campus. Is I worked in a really incredible lab, and I got really lucky. And through that lab, I ended up publishing or co-authoring a paper or two. And that paper ended up getting me this scholarship called the Astronaut Scholarship. And it was through that scholarship that I learned about aerogel. NASA said that aerogel is the lowest thermal conductive solid in existence. Bunch of fancy words meaning it's the best insulation in the universe. They're telling me they're using this stuff to insulate the space shuttles, the Mars rovers, all these things in space. And so I'm like, hold on a minute. Like, space is negative 455 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the coldest temperature in the universe. And you're telling me you're using this stuff to keep things warm in space? Like, that should be in every single jacket in the world. And, thinking back to this time I was on top of the mountain looking like the Michelin Man, this seemed like a beautiful solution. And so, I was really excited at the time. And I ended up pitching the idea to now Oros co-founder and COO Rithvik Venna right before an organic chemistry exam. I said, Rith, like, what if we took this NASA space shuttle installation and just put it into apparel so you could have really thin gear that keeps you warm? And he's like, yeah, I hate being cold, dude. Same here. And so we very quickly became obsessed with this idea, but we also very quickly learned why this magical, incredible insulation wasn't being used in apparel. Because aerogel has been around since 1931. You'd think someone else would have thought of this idea before, and if so, well, there's got to be a reason why it didn't work. And so we learned really quickly that aerogel was incredibly brittle. If you would poke it, it would just shatter into 1,000 little pieces. If you type aerogel into Google and press images, you'll see like this light blue, translucent looking material. It looks really cool. It's also the lightest substance in the world. It's the best insulation in the world. So, two great qualities, but it turns out it's just super brittle. So you can't really, bad news bears for apparel. So our passion project became trying to figure out a way to take the best insulation and just make it flexible and durable enough for apparel. That became our passion project. And school went to the wayside, and that 10 grand from that scholarship disappeared very quickly.
Yeah.
But by our senior years, we got incredibly lucky, and we ended up creating the first ever flexible, durable aerogel composite in the world. And that's what's called Solar Core. And that's what's in all of our gear today.
And what's the difference between solar core and like pure aerogel? Is it a compound blended with other things to give it that not like a little bit less brittle capacity?
So pure aerogel is the best insulation, but it's brittle. And so to make it not brittle, you need to create a composite. So you need to take aerogel and combine it with something that is flexible and durable. We ended up combining it with closed cell foam. Foam's used in everything. It's used in insoles and shoes. It's used in automotive industry pretty heavily. And so we found some foams that were commonly used and figured like, all right, well, it's already being used. Like, I wonder what would happen if you combine closed cell foam and aerogel. And our first hire out of college was a dude named Jeff Nash. Jeff now is our chief technology officer and VP of product. But prior to Oros, he led innovation and materials at the North Face. And with Jeff, he was super skeptical. He's been pitched everything under the sun. Here are these two, at the time, 22-year-old kids. It's like, he goes, I'll start part-time. And so he came back like 6 months later and said, hey, so I tested Solar Core against every other insulation, like over 250 at the time. Now it's above 350. He said, hey, I haven't found anything warmer. I'm like, dude, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Like, it's the warmest insulation in the world. And so that's great. It's warmer than everything else out there. But the reason that Solar Core is so impactful gets back to the challenge that I had on top of the mountain. And that's the same challenge that the industry's had since the beginning of time. And the problem is just bulk. The industry calls it loft, LOFT. If you take goose down, the way goose down works is goose down traps air, and the more air it traps, the more insulation it provides. The problem is air takes volume or space. So the more air you funnel in there, the puffier and puffier your jacket's going to get. But if you compress the jacket and you lose all the airspace, you lose the ability to stay warm. So the point I'm getting at is since the beginning of time, there's been this dependency on bulk, on volume, on loft to stay warm. And what's super interesting is that's not true with solar core. And so what that means is for the first time in history, you can wear a thin amount of insulation and still stay warm. For the first time in history, you don't have to look like the Michelin man to stay warm. And that's the real game changing piece about solar. Yes, it's warmer, but more importantly, you don't have to wear all the bulk and layers. It's
Yeah,
it's it's
which
it's a
is
game.
huge.
Yeah, that's what we thought at the time. But we didn't know. We thought we knew the impact. So at this point, we're seniors in college, and we have some pretty cool tech. And our next question was like, would anyone buy it? We were out of money, and so we ended up launching a Kickstarter with the goal of 100 grand. And for Rith and me, that was our deciding factor between Oros and med school. In the first like 36 hours, we ended up hitting 125 grand, like more money than two college kids from the Midwest have ever seen before in our
Right.
lives.
Yeah.
And closed the campaign at like 300 something, and that was the start of Oros. That was in May 2015. It's been 5 years and so much has happened. Companies doubled every year and really incredible team, some great investors. But the biggest thing is that when Rith and I started out, we had one goal. And the goal was to create a long sleeve shirt that you can wear sub freezing and still stay warm.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like in today's world, that's insane to even think about.
The industry is so antiquated. The world is evolving at exponential speeds. I look at my dad and like sometimes he has a hard time like accessing his email or like figuring out how to do something with the TV, right? And like I just think I can't imagine with how much faster the world is changing every day what I'm going to be like when I'm, mid 50. But the point I'm getting at is like the world's evolving so quickly and outerwear's not. And so we saw this really incredible opportunity with Solar Core, but what we're after is creating this long sleeve shirt that you can wear sub freezing and still stay warm. Also, as we mentioned, the original aerogel that NASA used was super brittle. You can't take that aerogel and turn it into a fiber that you turn into a long sleeve shirt because that fiber will also naturally be brittle. So you need an aerogel that innately is flexible and durable. Well, right when we were graduating college, NASA ended up creating and patenting a new type of aerogel, an aerogel that was also incredibly flexible. And so for us, like that was the first sense that this idea was possible. And August 2019, we have a board meeting. Jeff walks up with a Pelican case and opens up the Pelican case and shows the board the first ever aerogel fiber. And the board went crazy. And Jeff said, 4 years ago when you hired me, I said that solar core was the warmest thing in the world. Now, I believe this is the warmest insulation in the world. Ultimately, what makes Oros different is we truly believe in innovation and ultimately sciencing the shit out of everything we do. That's what makes Oros special, and that's what we love.
I want to dive into that. The first piece in the way you've iterated and grown the product. So a couple questions here. One, I imagine that it's such a difficult challenge, to integrate the aerogel, the solar core into a jacket or any wearable apparel that's malleable. But two, to design it in a way that's fashionable enough where people want to prefer that product over, the Nikes, the Adidases, the Canada Gooses, all these brands. How have you guys tackled that kind of two-pronged problem? And what other things from the initial jacket have you put the material in that you've gotten good response for?
So the first jacket that we made was designed by two science geeks in a college dorm room, and it was a pretty ugly jacket. And so that first product had nothing to do with fashion. For us, was our minimum viable product to get into the market. Since then, so much has changed. One of the big things that we did, which we actually did last year, is we relocated the company to Portland, Oregon. And the reason why is Portland is the technical apparel capital of the world. It's the headquarters of Nike. It's the North American headquarters of Adidas. It's the headquarters of Columbia. And so for us, it was, outside of the access to the outdoors, which is something that's really important for our brand, it was a really great opportunity to get access to product talent. And so right when we knew we were going to relocate here, we started building up a really solid product team. And one of our hires was a guy named Alistair Hather, who's now our design director. And prior to Oros, he was on Adidas's futures team. So he was responsible with taking any new technology at Adidas and building product around it. I think it's really important to know what you don't know. And one of the things that Rith and I acknowledge that we don't know is product design. And so building a proper team that could help us in that initiative is really crucial.
Yeah. Is the strategy to go two-tiered with jackets and outerwear and now progress with the long sleeve and some of the more like base layer type stuff? Or are you gonna go an all in now with this new technology you guys have developed with the long sleeve type shirt?
So when we started with one jacket, the Orion jacket. And then that grew the next year into just outerwear. Then we had our Endeavor jacket, which was our ski jacket, and we had gloves, mittens, all those things. But we noticed that we were selling, you know, really well 4 months out of the year. And so we ended up launching what we now call the performance wear category, things like our quarter zips. And this performance wear category has become our fastest growing category. And it starts to lean into that same area of the long sleeve shirt from a category perspective.
One thing I wanted to ask is like the functionality of being able to wear less bulk and be warmer is an obvious thing you'd think to almost anyone. It seems like there's an incremental step that people go from like, "Oh, that's cool. Oh, I would use that," to then purchase. How much education have you had to do for your customers, right? You've got those early adopters which likely will try anything cool, and I'm sure you've captured a decent amount of those. Have you already started to break into, the down the down the curve a bit?
I think I think the level of education varies, and I think you captured one of the reasons why of early adopter versus those buying into the pure tech versus the actual value proposition. And I do think it takes some education, and it's something that we've spent a lot of time on. I think the fundamental thing is we need to right away express the value proposition right up front. That's both with copy and imagery. Oros's brand idea is find your beyond. And that's what we're all about, and that's what we're empowering is for you to be able to be at your best, for you to be able to go outside your comfort zone, for you to be able to find your beyond. We empower that with the value proposition of our products of ultimate warmth without the bulk. And that's powered by our technology. It is a lot to convey. We found certain things work better than others. We have two customers today. We have a early 30-year-old, decent split between male and female, that lives in an urban environment but still likes to spend a lot of time outdoors. That's our target customer. It's also made up the largest customer of Oros so far. And we call this person the modern urbanite. And expressing the value proposition to them and getting them to buy into the tech has been easier than we expected. They care more about the technology than the next consumer. The next consumer and the second largest consumer for us is a slightly older consumer, late 40s to early 50s, still lives in that urban environment, but instead of spending all their time outside on the weekends, they just want to be able to walk their dog on a cold Chicago winter day while staying warm. And this consumer simply cares about the value proposition and a little bit less about the tech. And so we found that focusing on benefit over features, but having the technology story easily present and visible should you want to get to it is kind of like our winning hand.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you guys think about positioning So you've got your like, and you would know better. You would know about this category obviously better than me, but when you go to a Dick's Sporting Goods or like a big box retailer, you've got your Columbias and North Face jackets that are coming in around, between 80 and $150 depending. And then, I was looking at your website. You have a variety of products at different price points, but yours is probably in the next tier up, right? 200 to 350 depending on the SKU. And then you've got these crazy premium Canada Goose and Moose Knuckle that's like $800. How do you pick, which category do you want to grow into over time? And how do is one of those two customer buckets one that you kind of just say, okay, that's not our tier and we're going to focus somewhere else? How do you think about that?
You nailed it. We're upper middle market. We're not in our tariffs price point, but we're going to be above Columbia. And it's very purposeful, and it's tied back into who's buying our product. That second tier, the 40 to 50-year-old, can very easily afford our product. But as I mentioned, our largest category of consumers is early 30-year-old, actually, let's say late 20 to mid 30s. And affording the premium price point can be harder for that consumer. And so we found via a lot of price testing the right pricing model based on what consumers buying our product. And so we're pretty happy with the price points that we have.
No, I think they're great. Similar type of question around like the competitive landscape. Are you building to be bought by either the performance wear, Adidas, Nike, Under Armour type group, or an outerwear, Columbia, North Face type group? Or are you building this brand, from the ground to try to compete with those big players?
If we weren't a competition or a threat, I don't know if they'd have any reason to buy us. And so I think it's very closely tied. Oros is still a very young company. We've raised venture capital, so an exit at some point is needed. But right now, my focus is just building a really great company with really great people and really great technology.
Yeah, that's fair. When you think about marketing, so this ties into the kind of customer education piece. Have you tried anything outside the box that's worked well? So, your typical marketing strategies, at least that I've heard on this show, your Instagram ads, your Facebook ads, you got some influencer marketing. Have you tried anything outside the box that's worked?
Of course, yeah. I think you need to. If you just follow the typical D2C play model, you're going to lose. And I think there's been a lot of great articles about that recently about if you follow the standard model of D2C brands, that model's old, antiquated, and dying, and CPCs are increasing every year. And so I think thinking outside of the box is the only thing that might work. And for us, what we found to be incredibly, incredibly successful is things that engage our community. So, for example, we had a pop up in Chicago in Q1 of this year, and we found the most successful days of that pop up to be when we had in store activations. And the coolest one was when we launched the pop up, and we flew in the most famous astronaut to ever have come from Illinois, and his name's Scott Scooter Altman. And Scooter was the last man to see the Hubble telescope with his own eyes. A really incredible, incredible man. And he did an Ask an Astronaut series at the pop up where he spent 15 minutes explaining to the audience, how he found us beyond in space, and spent the last 45 minutes taking questions from the crowd. Everything ranging from like, do you have to pee in your spacesuit to how do you brush your teeth? All these cool questions. And the store capacity was 48, so pretty small store. But in that hour, we had over 200 people at the store and line out the door. And we found the point I'm getting at is we found that these moments of community engagement, while they built brand, which is ultimate point of community engagement, but they were also really profitable moments for us. Our biggest revenue day was that day, and our most profitable day was that day. And we found the same thing with our other store activations. And so, one of the biggest learning lessons we've had from a marketing and branding side is the importance of these brand activations and community engagement.
That's awesome. I wonder, what does your team and your marketing team think about how do you, and I know we're not going to make Corona forever, but how do you maintain that sort of community engagement virtually and through your online channels? Because that's obviously important as well.
So, with the coronavirus, we started doing lab experiments that you and your kids can do from home. And every week, post a new science experiment. And that's been one of our highest engaging posts on all of our social channels. and I've really loved that and the community engagement that's come around that. It's less selling focused, but it really ties back into the Oros brand, and we found that it engages our community pretty well.
So, from a scale and growth perspective, I think something that's interesting and always been interesting about you is you're such a visionary. If you were to manifest 5 to 10 years from now, where do you want Oros to be? Where do you want the product to be? And where do you want the company to be?
Every single person that lives in an urban environment should not own a winter jacket. They should have a long sleeve shirt made by Oros that is all you need throughout the winter, and that's success. That's the ultimate success is manifestation of our vision and adoption of that product and technology across our consumer base.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm going to shift to kind of more of the second section. I've got a ton of questions here that I'm really excited to get your take on. So the first couple are around hiring. So the first one, what characteristics do you look for in the people that you hire, and what have been and what have proven to been consistent qualities across the superstars that you found?
We have a pretty unique culture at Oros, and I have a series of questions that I like to ask every person we interview, and those questions get back to what Oros stands for and what we'd like to see in the team at Oros. And so I found that those questions are incredibly helpful in terms of a cultural fit. I firmly believe that, soft skills are way more important than hard skills. With that said, I also believe that scaling your company to the next level often takes someone with experience. And so hiring is incredibly difficult to do well. And we've definitely failed at that before. I don't think we have a perfect method by any means, but we are incredibly fortunate with the team that we have. The biggest thing for me is that culture fit and how someone decides to answer those 21 questions that Rith and I have developed about who we are as a brand.
What are your core values?
The thing I like about ours specifically is it really came from Rith and my founding story of who we are. And the first is take the moonshot. When Rith and I were in college, we had this idea on a napkin that a lot of people made fun of us for. Like, who are these two college kids with no money that think that they're going to take this NASA technology and turn it into an incredible technology company? And so for us, like one of the things I really admire in people is if they're willing to take that first step. The first step is honestly the hardest thing in the world. The thing that is hard after that is having the grit, which is our second value, to continue down that path. You're going to fail every day. Being able to brush yourself off and keep going is incredibly important. On that point of have grit, as a society, we're very interesting. We view failure as a bad thing, and here are two science geeks that started this company. The way we view the world, whether it's product creation or marketing or R&D, everything's a science experiment. Take your ads. Your hypothesis is that the new ad you created will have a lower CPA than the first ad, and you test it and you run it, and you're running a hypothesis, and you have your control and your variable. It's a science experiment, and you're going to fail. You're going to find out that no, your hypothesis was wrong. That's obviously on a small scale. The point I'm getting at is, as a society, when we fail in those little things, we take it as a negative, and it discourages us, and it makes us not want to keep going. I think that's the total wrong approach. What those are, what those little moments in your day are, is a learning. It's you now know something you didn't know before. You know that hypothesis is wrong, and it allows you to reformulate your hypothesis to try again, and eventually you're going to get it right. And so I think having the right mindset on failure and what that means in terms of having grit, our second value, is incredibly important. Our other values, of which we have five, so we have seven total values, is be adaptable, be conscious, be transformative, take ownership, and and be collaborative.
The comments on failure is so key. Someone said it on here a few episodes ago, which I loved, is you're basically just getting reps. Like every time you fail, you're getting another rep, and you just keep getting reps. And then after a while, like you get to where you want to go because you have had all the reps and all the failure avenues that you ultimately succeed. I love that. Another question. So one more question on hiring. So who is your most underrated or timely hire? So you don't have to name a name if you don't want to, but this would be someone that you brought on to do a job and they excelled not only at that job, but something else that you weren't expecting, or they filled some kind of functional need that you had desperate need for at that time and just, hit it out of the park.
We brought on this guy to run our social, and he's since grown into so much more, and he's always on it, and it's been pretty incredible to watch. And the other thing that's been really cool is like that spirit, that willingness to commit, that drive to learn more and to make the company succeed is something that's adopted across the company. I'll tell you, man, like that is one of the coolest things to see and feel is when you see, it's different when it's just you and Rith, you and your co-founder, and you guys believe in this thing so much. And it's interesting and powerful when you see others that not just join your team, but share that same drive and passion and are willing to sacrifice to make this vision come to life. That's really powerful.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. That's awesome. In terms of funding, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from an investor pitch? Have you ever got burned? If not, kind of what are some words of wisdom for people that are aspiring entrepreneurs?
We've raised I want to say around $10 million to date from some great VCs and angels. And my biggest lesson is take every single meeting that you can and practice your pitch over and over and over and over and over again. That's the biggest thing. The VCs have a really great job. It's their job to say no, right? Like at the end of the day, they only need to swing when they want to. It's totally different than baseball, right? Like baseball, you got three strikes and then you're out. Well, the beautiful thing about being a VC is you don't have to swing. You can only swing when you want to. And so, it's their job to say no. And you're going to get told no many, 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 many times. And so I think the important thing is taking as many meetings as you can. And the other thing we've learned about that is that many of the VCs that came in later rounds were VCs that said no to us in prior rounds. And so there's this value of not just taking those meetings, but maintaining those relationships and giving people the opportunity to watch your progress and watch your business grow. Ultimately, those that are aligned with your vision but maybe don't think it's the right time, they'll find a lot of confidence in your ability to manage and your ability to build should you let them follow your business for a period of time.
Yeah. So I've got like kind of a yin and yang set of questions here. So first one would be, can you recall a story or experience that was your most frustrating or difficult moment on this journey so far as a founder?
There's so many. There's this book by Ben Horowitz called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And in it, there's a section called The Struggle. Previous to trying to start my own company with Rith, it's something that I wouldn't have appreciated or understood. And the section talks about being so anxious or worried that you can't eat or sleep. I hate to say it, but it's almost a rite of passage. It's something that you can very well experience more than once. And that moment or series of moments is something that you definitely experience. So for me, there was a moment that in a prior round, we got very far along with a VC and signed a term sheet with this thing called a no shop clause. And with a no shop clause, you as a company are not allowed to shop that deal with other VCs. It's meant to prevent you from trying to get a better deal, which is very fair and makes sense. Well, we got really far along, like several months later, with that VC, and then they told us no, hey, we're not going to invest. And at that point, we were down to less than 30 grand in the bank, and like wondering how the hell we were going to make payroll, and had to quickly find a way to go raise capital, and ended up doing so actually at a higher valuation than we were given previously, or with that prior term sheet. That moment of, oh shit, was horrifying. And what made it worse was the day we got the no, that night, a car decided to drive through our company's office and just shatter and break everything. So it
Holy
was like,
shit. That's crazy.
yeah, it was this surreal moment of like it couldn't get worse than this.
That was a sign. They were trying to say, like, don't do the deal. Like, they
Totally.
stop everything. That's crazy. So on the flip side of that, I guess the easy answer would be once you finally raise that money in that 30 days. But, what's a moment where you just stood back for a second and were just felt so proud, so validated, which, is the highs of being a founder, which is why you go through those lows.
The first moment was like Rith and I were putting, what we thought was our futures since we were kids on the line of this whole doctor thing, and our families were a little nervous about that, to say the least. And we launched this Kickstarter campaign and hit that 100 grand mark, and like we're just dumbfounded. Like, who would decide to believe in 222-year-olds astronomical idea? That was a really surreal moment. Since then, honestly, a lot of it's been smaller moments, like all hands on deck team meetings, and just like looking around the table or the Zoom conference, and like just seeing the team's passion for what we're building. And that's been more of those moments recently of like how fortunate we are to have the team that we have.
Something that I think applies to you guys that I'd love to get your take on. I feel like this doesn't apply to all founders, but some founders that are successful, you hear the stories, they really had nothing to lose. Their backs were against the wall, and that's when they just went all in. But for people like you and Rith, you had something to lose. Like you said, you had the med school, not on a platter, but you worked for it your entire life. Was that the thing that was kind of holding you back mentally? So obviously, you said if we raise the 100K, we'll go for it. Was that Kickstarter 100K? Was that just a switch where you're like, all right, we have to honor our commitment? Or still in your mind, was that, something holding you back a little bit? And how did you get over that?
You know, I don't know if it was holding us back. It was weird, like we were in college up until like 2 a.m. on Saturdays, ideating and working, and we were just weirdly, and still to this day, just incredibly passionate and excited. And I also think part of it was like at that point in your life, you spent your whole life learning out of a textbook. There's always a right answer, especially if you're, math, science, and you get graded against it. Like you got a 99%. And there was like this freeing experience that we found with um, what we were trying to do, that there wasn't always a right answer. And that was weirdly exciting. It was almost like there was a challenge, like that was, that's definitely part of the thrill, I think. I think the average rating for it, if you were to give an average rating to a management team or a CEO, it's like a C plus or something like that. And like it's so different than, when you're 22, what you spent your last 21 years doing. And that's cool.
Yeah, that is super cool. If you could teleport back to, the first couple months when you guys were starting, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell you and Rith then that would help you, either excel faster or prepare for troubles down the road?
Uh, when you're a 22 bright-eyed kid, there's a lot you don't know, and we were incredibly fortunate. The first thing we did out of school was we formed an advisory board. One of the learning lessons I would like to tell myself is that there's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet. There's no one big thing that's gonna set you off. It really is a series of lead bullets, constant effort and attempts and science experiments and hypotheses and a bunch of little things that get you to the finish line. And that's a really important lesson that we learned along the way.
What are some of the biggest things keeping you guys up at night right now?
The world with COVID-19 and the coronavirus, especially in the world of discretionary consumer spending and brick and mortar retail, a lot of people don't know where the world's going to be, and having to project against that, manage a team against that. Those things, have now become more challenging, and there's more uncertainty, and so that's probably the biggest. And I'm, humbled by our team's leadership and by the mentorship that we're getting from investors and advisors.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a crazy time for so many categories to navigate through it. All right, I have a couple questions, a little less related to Oro specifically, but love to get your take. So the first one's around like trend sensing. So I think you're always on the cutting edge. Is there any trend outside of the technical apparel you're working on right now? It doesn't even have to be an apparel that you're excited by, either as a consumer or like you see other opportunities of startups coming up in certain spaces that really inspire you.
Are you familiar with CRISPR?
Yeah, the, like, genetic resequencing.
2 decades ago, that technology and the potential capability of that technology was science fiction, just like a lot of other things. I think there's a lot of, for better or worse, there's a lot of debate around the morality of CRISPR and all that, but there's a lot of opportunity there that I believe can change the world. And so that's one of the things I've been spending a lot of time recently, in my free time anyway, studying and reading about.
Okay, another question around morning routine. A lot of these founders have regimented morning routines they stick to. Do you have one? And if so, what does that look like?
I don't know if I do. I've tried different things. If my girlfriend were on the call, she'd say, Michael, you set 12 alarms. You
Same.
wake up at your fifth, and I hate it. Just set one alarm. I would say I'm generally up by 6:30. If I'm lucky, I try to get like some workout in before work. I found that morning workouts for me are incredibly rejuvenating. I try to work out at least once a day, partially for the physical fitness, but really I think it's a great opportunity to clear your head. But outside of that, I don't have much of a routine. I think most people in the office would say that I wear the same clothes. I wear a black V-neck every day. And so I think one of the things I've done is like just to simplify the choices you have to make.
Yeah. No, I'm the same way. And I've experimented with so many, daily meditation, try to get up certain times, drink the cold water with the salt. I've tried a lot of those things and I just can't. There's so much that gets thrown at you that's different every day. It's tough to implement that same regimen every time and not get mad at yourself if you don't do it. If I were to give you 30 seconds to pitch someone on one thing that they could do to improve their life, either across mentality, health and fitness, sleep, etc., what would you recommend and how would you pitch that to them?
Yeah, that's a hard one. There's no rules in this game. If someone has a book for you on like, here are the 5 things that you need to do to be successful as an entrepreneur, like it's 100% BS. Like everything's guidelines, and the only things I can say are just things I've learned from my experience, and they might not apply to you. But in terms of mental health and physical health and wellness, just for me, like there was a time where in college I was in great shape and I was a personal trainer and I worked out a lot, and then I stopped that for a short period of time while we were building Oros, and I found myself being more sluggish, not as on it as I wanted to be. What I've since done is work out on a pretty consistent basis, and found that I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And then also it helps level set me and clear my head.
Awesome. Other than the hard thing about hard things, what books, newsletters, podcasts, follows on social media, or any other resources would you recommend for either an aspiring founder or anyone who's just interested in kind of building businesses and these types of topics?
There's been a lot of great books. Honestly, hands down, best book, Hard Thing About Hard Things. no doubt in my mind, best book I've ever read. There's a lot of books like Good to Great, and I liked it, but Good to Great is the reason why I think Ben Horowitz wrote The Hard Thing About Hard Things. In terms of actual data, Crunchbase, PitchBook, those things are great resources. Outside of that, though, honestly, the most important resource for me has been the advisors and the mentors and the value that they've brought into me since Rith and I were 22 and in a college dorm room.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so final two questions. We ask these to every guest. The first one is the startup manifesto. So if you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
So caveat this with, this is from my experiences, and I don't think that there's a 5-point, 10-point guideline to success. You got to make your own. But one that we've mentioned on the call is there's no silver bullet. Prepare yourself for a bunch of lead bullets. Number 2, everything that you do in entrepreneurship is a science experiment. You form a hypothesis, test it. 3, know your why. Know why you're building what you're building. Form a culture around that. Establish who your company is and what you stand for, and make it spawn from why you're doing what you're doing. That's the 3rd. Don't lose sight of your physical and emotional and mental health through the process. Your company's only be as great as you are. And so make sure you're on top of your game. And then if I had to do a 4th, buy Oros. That's a good
By Oros.
That's a good 5th. Yeah.
There
that's
you go.
5th value.
Yeah, that's great. And then, so the second question we ask everyone is for a nomination. So it's your turn to nominate another founder that's either a friend, colleague, mentor of yours that you'd like to see on the show.
Do you know another Miami grad, a little older than both of us, and was a mentor for me, especially early on? Do you know Sean Lane over at Olive?
No.
Dude's incredible, sold a bunch of companies, was a poli-sci major at Miami, now started a company called Olive out of Columbus, Ohio, and doing phenomenal things. He'd be a pretty good one.
Cool. Thanks for that. So before we wrap, I just want to acknowledge you for a second. Something that inspired me about you is really the vision. So I think, it's so hard to start a company. It's even harder to invent a category, and it's even harder to invent a material that then supplies that category and fuels growth. So I think, and I mentioned this before, you've always impressed with your vision, and you never lost sight of the North Star. So I really appreciate and inspired by you for that. And I'm excited to stay connected and support Oros as you guys grow.
Totally. Kyle, it's been a pleasure, and definitely looking forward to the future.
Awesome. One last thing, if people hear this and they want to, buy Oros products or want to contact you, follow you on social, do you want to plug up Oros in your personal handles?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Website, orosapparel.com. Instagram is @orosapparel. Same thing with Twitter. You can find us there.
Cool. Michael Markesbery, founder of Oros. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you for listening to that episode with Michael Markesbery of Oros. Remember, if you liked what you heard and want to support the show, there's a couple quick things you can do that would really help us out. 1, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you go on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star rating and a couple-sentence positive review on why the show inspired you. These ratings and reviews are super important, and they signal to Apple that they should put our show in front of other people that might like it. 2, follow us on social, mainly Instagram, @FounderPodcast. Each week we put out teasers, audio clips, and important quotes from the episode. And lastly, check out our website as a mission control for the show. Go to thefounderpod.com. We have a page on there called Special Offers where we link up discount codes from our founders' companies, as well as all the books and resources that have been recommended across our episodes. I hope you enjoyed that episode and are looking forward to the next one. Until then, I'm Kallaway, and this is The Founder.